Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Chris Knerr, Chief Digital Officer of Syniti, a world leader in enterprise data software, and we're partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers to bring you this series of interviews with thought leaders in data and analytics. Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the interview series Ray Deiotte, CDO of NetApp. Welcome, Ray. Terrific to meet you.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Ray, I'd like to dive right in and get your take on streaming and IoT. So obviously NetApp is a platform company and your products are core to the whole concept of data fabric. And for your clients, you enable a huge volume of streaming data. So, for the audience, the IoT and streaming narrative is very hot. What's your perspective? Should we believe the hype? Are your customers seeing value from the integration and utilization of streaming and IoT data?
Yeah, I think, the hype is there. I think where we need to continue to work is to continue to work on those use cases that streaming data or building data for data's sake. But as I look at the industries that we work with, especially in healthcare and life sciences, streaming and IoT is really starting to build a head of steam behind it because we're starting to see more real-time actions needing to be taken, whether that's in response to COVID on the healthcare side of the house, or if it's in response to production optimization on the life sciences side of the house and our pharma clients. But we're definitely seeing a rise in IoT, and it's starting to drive new decisions. Even internally at NetApp, we use a lot of our own capabilities to drive edge, core, and cloud in order to better provide our customer set real-time insight into what their systems are doing and get ahead of any issues that we might see with those deployed systems.
Okay, that's really helpful, and I like the emphasis on use cases, and I like the clarity on a good criterion if I sort of follow your line of happen in real time, and that's where we're going to get sort of more bang for the buck.
Yeah, but we need to look for that value, that real time value, but we have to bring kind of the whole ecosystem together, because if we're generating data in real time but we have no way to consume it in real time and really act on it in real time, that becomes an issue, right? At that point, we're just collecting data for data's sake. So one of the partners that we're working with now, they have a sneaker net problem that we're instrumenting with real-time IoT in order to accelerate them. But the reason we can accelerate them is that they're hungry for that data. They've got the consumption mechanism already built up. And so the data will go right into that consumption algorithm so that they aren't sitting around waiting for data anymore. 5 years ago, it probably wouldn't have been ready for them to do that. And sneaker netting into a batch so that they could do batch analytics was probably perfectly acceptable for their use case.
Yeah, no, and that's a really helpful distinction, and I agree. I mean, it's basically to simplify, you got to have the handshake. So you can produce an infinite amount of data in real time, but if you have no way of looking at it or bringing it to the point of consumption, visualization, and so on, there's not much point. I want to go back to your point about the whole ecosystem, because one of my observations in working in a lot of large enterprises is that I think we've had a story in the industry, in particular over the last 5 to 10 years, that sort of cloud makes everything simpler, and here are different technologies, and everything's really interoperable. In real life, what I've found is that data integration and data interoperability continues to be a huge challenge for most enterprises. So maybe with respect to some of the examples, you could talk about, what's significant from like an IT ops standpoint. So for example, I've got real-time streaming data and it's about an asset. But on the back end of that, I've still got to have, an asset master. I've still got to have master data management that's properly curated. I might have a lot of neat data, but I don't even know what I'm looking at, and I have no way to tie it back to that sort of broader functional framework and IT operational framework. What am I on the right track that that's still a problem? And what's your thinking about that?
Yeah, so interop and integration will always be a problem in any industry, because nobody has come to the panacea of one, form of data to rule them all, if you will. But what you're getting to is really what's necessary across any data ecosystem. And that is a good set of governance. right? And understanding how that data is going to be mastered and used, curated and stewarded through the system will help bring along all of the things that you discuss about problems with interoperability and integration and matching to a device master. All of those bits and pieces need to be formed under an enterprise governance program that then brings together all of your static data, your historical data, and your streaming form that can be utilized to solve the questions of the day. Yeah,
I'm 100% on the same page, and I think the G word, governance, always continues to be a challenge. I've found extensively, again, in enterprises, there continues to be a lot of education that's required, particularly at a senior executive level. On governance doesn't mean something slow and expensive; it actually means something fast. It's kind of sticking with this theme of the So maybe to paraphrase what you said, and I agree with this, is that the streaming in real-time data actually underscores the need for governance.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is this like even a worse challenge as it relates to that executive education and kind of the process and organizational readiness of data operations and data governance teams to be able to cope with?
I think it does, because everything is becoming more and more instrumented. In healthcare, we look at consumer wearables, we look at IoT devices. The more we start dealing or continue to deal with healthcare at home and remote sensing on patients, the larger a problem this becomes. And so what it speaks to is not just the need for governance, but the need for, as you said earlier, more of an agile governance model where we can adapt rapidly to those new tools coming in, whether it's a new glucose monitor even for our traveling nurses. All of those bits and pieces should be able to fall into that dynamic governance model that takes systems thinking with agile development and agile integration and marries the two together in a way that solutions can be rapidly integrated and transform the way that we're providing care or that we're providing capability to our customers.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot, Ray. I love this idea of agile governance, but I think a lot of people would say that sounds like a paradox, right? So and I think you just gave some granular characteristics. But if you were to describe in your mind, what would be 3 or 4 major characteristics of agile data governance? What would they look like?
Yeah, so it's all about taking it from a use case perspective. Instead of saying, hey, we need to master all of the data across the enterprise, which obviously is the end goal. It's about taking incremental steps and looking at use cases or looking at use areas of the data and doing the governance process on them. And now when we're talking about agile, we're not talking about 2 to 4 week sprints, right? But we're talking about something that behaves more agile, that we're looking at very accomplishable steps, very repeatable steps to generate mastered data that falls in the governance of the organization. So the way we've implemented it in the past is that we start with use cases, we generate what we think the governance should be around that information, how it should be curated, how it should be stewarded, and then we take a subset of the data that we know we have in that domain, we go, we master it, we do everything that we need to, and then we circle back iteratively and understand the lessons learned from building out that curated now set of data and information that can be leveraged across the enterprise. And we take those lessons learned and put them back into this design thinking and agile process to really iterate and do this rapidly so that you're not trying to take on the millions or billions of complex environment.
So I really like this idea a lot. I want to sort of replay this with 2 thoughts. So when I help people with data strategy work, I have a point of view that I'm not going to do strategy work for more than a few months because it's not going to end up being meaningful. I have to get into doing some real life project work, and that informs what we're doing. And then I think what I really like about this idea of agile governance is it's almost like the same, quote unquote, the requirements. Mm-hmm. So we're absolving ourselves of the illusion or delusion that we can actually figure out a priori everything that we need to do. We figure out enough to get going. We motivate it with some real life work, and then we iterate from that. that over time, done correctly with the right kind of leadership and oversight, should lead us to some, call them medium-sized building blocks of a data governance framework of explaining, why governance doesn't mean something slow and ineffective and expensive. It actually means something that is building from the ground up in a way that's going to be useful and produce dollars and business value.
Yeah, absolutely. But and the reason it's come about, Chris, is that when we look at all of the things that are going on, I know we started talking about streaming, but as we start looking into the domain of augmented intelligence and advanced analytics, when we bring in inference on streaming data or we bring in inference on data, we don't necessarily, especially in healthcare and life sciences, have a well-governed, well-curated data set on which to build that. So the goal of this agile governance model is to go side by side with these high profile, high profit margin use cases around AI and advanced analytics, both with streaming and batch data, to help build up the foundation so that you can make advances and build transformation into the operations of the organization without having to do an all stop and build the entire platform and the entire foundation out in order to support your one or two, AI or AA use cases. You can now do it simultaneously and start seeing the value of that advanced technology adoption faster than you could before.
So this is really interesting. I want to let me go a little further into one area of this. So when I first started working, and this is going 6 or 7 years back, when I first started heavily working on what at the time was called big data, there was a whole school of thought of I'd call the if you build it they will come. So just get what you were calling before data for data's sake. What I think I just heard you say, and I want to play this back, is that doing this correctly in an agile governance mode is almost like enlightened schema on read, right? So It's not schema on read in the sense of, just dump everything and we'll figure out what we want to do with it later, but that you have sort of, a crayon drawing of the use cases you may want to do. You have some real life proof points that, again, back to this requirements management, you're neither assuming you can do everything a priori, nor are you assuming that if you just collect an infinite amount of data that you'll find something neat consequent to it. Is that a fair interpretation?
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fair. And to your point, right, it allows that incremental success to be driven by incremental progress, right? And eventually you'll get to the point where you can go, I want to look at the entirety of our data and see if there's any unknowns lurking in there.
Right.
But that's not where you start. You start with the value. And the value is the problems that harass the organization day to day that you can put a finger on, but you need to build into. And you do that agilely, both in the governance perspective and in the product development perspective.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. This is really interesting, and I really like your thought process on this. Let me shift gears because you mentioned something else that intrigued me. So when we started, you were kind of talking about you've got a lens for your customers for NetApp. So sort of a two-part question. Does NetApp run on NetApp? And then maybe the other part of this is what I said I love talking to people who are tech sector and non-tech sector. What do tech sector folks know that corporate IT folks should know? And vice versa. Like if you could sort of walk a mile in the other person's shoes, what would each person see if they could look in that alternate universe mirror?
First of all, NetApp runs everything on NetApp, right? Everything that we put out, we run internally, right? So we're a fantastic story of, drinking our own Kool-Aid, eating our own, eggs, whatever metaphor you want to put in there, we do it and we do it right. And that extends from edge to core to cloud, right? We partner with all the hyperscalers and we leverage our capabilities in the hyperscalers. We leverage our capabilities in our data centers. We leverage our capabilities on the edge so that we can, like I said earlier, get ahead of any issues that might be coming. But having straddled that fence that you described, as I'm looking at corporate IT, I wish that they would understand that the things that the tech sector are putting out are only as good as the adoption and the marriage of value in corporate IT, right? when we go to a customer, we're not trying to sell a box or sell a capability, right? We're trying to work on a problem that has high value for the organization. And I think sometimes that translation is really lost. And vice versa. If we look at what corporate IT could tell the tech sector, it's look for the places of value, understand the industry that you're pushing into, know the personas and the problems that those personas have, and then work that way. And I think that's why my role at NetApp exists, and the team that I'm on exists, because we bring that subject matter expertise of the corporate IT around healthcare and life sciences back into the tech sector to help us better build product and build solution, and then marry that with the value generation that we can do within our customer set. So it's all about, communication and knowing one another and knowing the business of one another, especially when it comes to what the tech sector should know about corporate IT.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and that absolutely makes sense. And it's I've had this observation a lot from a talent lens that a lot of the time your rock stars end up being cross-functional folks. So folks who have worked in programmers who went to the business people who got interested in technology. But I think this cross-pollination between the corporate sector and then the technology sector is a really, really interesting lens on that.
Yeah, there was an article out, I don't know, a handful of years ago now, about the value of business translators. And those are those people who understand enough of the tech side and understand enough of the business side that they can form that bridge, right? And it was very much taken under the guise of the adoption of artificial intelligence and advanced analytics. But I think that paradigm exists now for all of tech. That there has to be people who understand the implications for the business and understand the tech enough to make that bridge and join those two pieces together in a very meaningful, effective manner.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's interesting. I've often sort of joked that, you hear technology, especially corporate technology folks, if you go to, internal or external conferences, a theme for a long time has been, like, show me the money, focus on the value. What's the business value? And I feel like maybe after many years of repeating that, we're finally getting to sort of a breakthrough where, all of the leaders that I talk to are kind of very focused on this. And, one would hope that it's percolating down through the organization or software company side and on the corporate IT side. So you mentioned the importance of industry, business value, and use cases. And let me as we're sort of wrapping up here, talk about some fundamentals. So if you think about the technical lens, the human lens, the innovation lens, and what's happening with digital transformation the next couple of years, and how important is that sort of, what they say when you're doing college applications, right? That pointiness around industry versus, sort of generalization at the technology layer or the platform level. Are there any sort of thoughts or predictions, in some of the spaces that we've talked about that are top of mind for you?
Yeah, I really think that transformation and innovation are going to all focused around data and that data exploitation. But it's not going to look anything like it does today, right? There's an entire paradigm of people that has to change in those sectors in order to bring about the innovation that has already been embraced and is evolving in other vertical industries. Part of that is just simply the regulation of healthcare and life sciences. But that can't be all of it, because you look at what's going on in fintech, which is just as highly regulated, or DoD and aerospace is just as highly regulated, but they're making these tremendous strides in innovation. So I think what's going to happen over the next couple of years is that we are going to see a mind shift as people move into retirement, and people who are now growing up with this technology of cloud and IoT and AI, they bring that early adoption or that ease of embracement to the innovation lands. We're going to see tremendous strides being taken in the augmentation of people and in the augmentation of decision-making when there is too much data to consider. Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about, exploiting all of the data within healthcare, or all of the data within life sciences. Well, that's great. But the next step and the next phase is then to bring in all of the other data from outside of your own little fiefdom and your own little ecosystem so that you can look at things that you could never look at before. And that transformation of technology, but in a mindset from the people's perspective, it's only exists in pockets. And so I have adoption of this kind of ubiquitous 360-degree view of patient, provider, consumer, system, whatever you want to demarket, that is going to be the next drive, is to form up this complete continuum of knowledge about an entity that we can then exploit in any number of ways, whether it's precision medicine, leveraging genomics, or it's in population medicine and understanding risk factors that then impact the work that's being done on the precision front, in healthcare. All of those things, bringing all of those pieces together with real-time streaming information and real-time sensing and distributed care models is really going to transform that industry. But it's got to start with the mindset changing to evolve into, people who are ready to consume that and make those transformational changes.
Interesting. I mean, I have just an observation that I'll share, and I have a life sciences background as well on the manufacturing side. So I've spent a few years in the industry. One of the things, and this is kind of I'll say a U.S. centric comment, but that's sort of the context of the discussion. So life sciences has got regulatory firewalls, as you point out. But then you look at financial services, and you're like, yeah, they have the same thing. There's something in healthcare economics and implicit financial firewalls that slow down the pace of technical innovation. So without kind of finger pointing, I think it wouldn't be outrageous to suggest that the way that healthcare economic system is established today, there actually are disincentives to data interoperability. And then that's one observation. So the second observation I agree with, which is that then if you go back to, sort of the classic IEOR in healthcare, the only thing I can staple myself to is myself. I'm the unit of work. So I think that your population demographics motivation for maybe that's the breakthrough where, we as professional consumers of healthcare, which we all care passionately about, we actually have to be the catalyst as humans to break through those artificial firewalls.
So to your latter point, I think that you're absolutely see what we should be driving for, especially as consumers, is to be the managers of our own data in the healthcare space. Yes. No longer should the IDNs and the hospital systems and the academic research facilities be the shepherds and stewards and curators of our data. Rather, we should be the stewards of our data ourselves. That way, the whole paradigm shift and monetary shift that you alluded to in your former comment about the difficulty of, the fiscal models and the compensation models in healthcare, that then starts to change kind of dramatically as you shift the nexus of ownership in healthcare. Now we can start looking at better optimization and better efficiencies, which is what we should be looking at in healthcare anyway, right? We know that the paradigm between, Hippocratic oath and compensation by the federal government or the payer sect are typically in conflict with one another. But as we look at this and as we look at the way that you can apply data and apply the information that the system has, driving efficiencies should negate all of that. It should be to the point of being able to drive efficiencies and effectiveness by introducing augmentative technologies should get us past that point, right? I hate that excuse. I hate the excuse of, hey, we're trying to drive OpEx up by leveraging our CapEx models and doing all of these other things to make sure that, our fiscals look right. Well, doing that by pushing more people through the door is one way to do it. The other way to do it is by streamlining internal processes and by leveraging the data that we already have and the analytics that we already have. You can really start to streamline things to the tunes of millions of dollars a year just by looking at simple use cases across the ecosystem of healthcare. So by bringing together then that internal look on optimization and efficiency, and transitioning to a consumer-owned data model, I think we'll actually see more transformation in the healthcare space than we have in the past 100 years.
I think you're spot on, and it's going to be really fascinating to watch this evolve, because it's sort of like I think the same as you do. It's sort of like the constellation. There are points of light in the constellation, right? I can't quite see the mythical figure yet, but it's emerging slowly over time. And I think that this idea of the professional consumer of your own health data, being the manager and accountable for that, and then I think that's got to be a wedge in changing something about the economic model in a way that's then a force multiplier to all of the operational efficiency and sort of EBITDA and growth lens for anyone who's working in any, in payer, provider, or on the manufacturing side. So I think all the pieces are coming into focus, and I think that like so many things, data is going to be critical.
I mean, CMS has come out with their ruling on interoperability and data sharing and all of those things. All of those pieces now start, to your point, aligning into those constellations. We just simply haven't brought them all together yet.
Yeah.
But I think that's on the horizon for the next decade.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. Can people find you online, Ray, if they'd like to connect with you?
I don't know what you want to call it, not a Luddite, but I typically keep myself to LinkedIn. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I've got a blog running around that you can find via LinkedIn as well. And that's the best way to hit me up.
Really a fascinating conversation. Terrific to meet you. Again, for our audience, my guest today was Ray Deiotte, CDO, excuse me. He's waiting for the promotion of NetApp. And you can find additional interviews in this podcast series at cdomagazine.tech. Thanks again, Ray, and hope you have a terrific day.
Thanks, Chris. You too.